Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this LinkedIn Learning broadcast called Make Change Happen. Today, we're going to be talking about uplifting organizational transformations. And I'm so thrilled. I've got an excitingly vibrant guest today. Her name is Nicte Cuevas, and Nicte is a fellow LinkedIn Learning instructor. Welcome, Nicte. Um,
You.
Thank you so much for deciding to spend your time and sharing some of your expertise here with people who are interested in change. Now, this is my primary interest area. I love change. I love organizational change because we're always constantly moving. Organizations are now in a situation where change is always in the pipeline. There's always something going on, whether that's organizational, whether it's a merger, whether there's a cultural change, whether we're moving towards a more customer focused or changing those customer behaviors, and then internally refocusing our employee behaviors. And one of the things that we often hear about change is change doesn't succeed. Change is really difficult to implement, or employees are finding it really difficult to connect with the change intent. So today we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about this. How do we connect more about change intent? And then talking about how do we incorporate other aspects of the change, such as color, such as branding, such as design, that can really make and amplify a change message. Now, before we go any further, I'd like to give you the stage, Nicte, to introduce yourself and to tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us a little bit about your journey, where you are now, and how do you add value to your customer and clients.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, Christina. I'm so excited to be here and have this really powerful conversation about change because there's so many layers and levels of subconscious ways that we deal and process change that I am just absolutely loving this conversation. I definitely know this is your area of expertise, so I'm really excited to see how we can connect these. So as far as me,
Yeah.
I'm Nicte Cuevas. I am a brand strategist and designer. And in my company, I really focus about how we can connect color, cultura, design into a purpose-driven brand strategy. So instead of thinking about how design functions as like one piece and another piece and like little
Mm.
components here and there, how does it all come together? And how do we communicate with our internal team, whether you have a small team or even if you're a small business with just a
Yeah.
party of one, how do you communicate and bring that across the board to your community, to the people you're trying to sell to? So it's this conscious communication, but also this unconscious communication. And a lot of it happens with color, like the way that we present ourselves and reach out.
Mm.
That has
Yeah.
always been my passion and really helping people and brands leverage the power of how we can communicate strategically is
Mm.
really kind of like the area that excites me.
Yeah, fantastic. And how, tell us a little bit about your journey. Like, how did you come to appreciate color? I can see all the color around you, and I love the vibrancy. I love the fact that,
Mhm.
it all makes it very visual. How did
Yeah.
you come to appreciate color?
I think a lot of it was subconscious. So I wasn't born
Mm.
in the States. Right now, I'm living in the beautiful state of Hawaii. I'm very, very blessed. I love it here. But I wasn't born or raised in the US. I came here when I was 18. And so long story short, I'm what I call myself a multicultural Latina. I was born in Mexico City,
Love
Mexico.
it.
My mom's
Yeah.
Colombian, my dad's Mexican, and I was raised in Venezuela. So my culture has always been mixed, and I've been very
Mm.
blessed to be raised in an environment. I was very lucky. I went to an international school, so I had a lot of friends from everywhere. So for me,
Yeah.
culture and color were my norm. I kind of
Mm.
took it for granted, but when I moved to the US, I didn't have that. And that's where I started to crave ways to that made me feel at home, that made me feel comfortable and included. And at that time
Yeah.
when I had moved, there wasn't that much embrace for speaking Spanish or showing your cultural identity. So I
Yeah.
encountered a lot of difficulties, some racism, some things that, didn't really, for an 18-year-old, I could not understand why people were being that way because I had a different experience. And
Mm,
my dad had told me at one point that to succeed, unfortunately, in that, world, then you kind of had to
yeah.
blend in. And I felt like I
Right.
can't hide who I am. So what I ended up doing without really realizing was I started using color to show my culture, to share,
Mm,
my pride
mm,
without having to verbally say it. So that
yeah.
was my way of kind of rebelling, but also sharing with pride of who I am and where I came from. And that started to open conversation. So as I went to college for design. And as I started to do more of that work, little by little, I started realizing that color just became part of my process. And as
Mm,
I started connecting with brands, I really started seeing how we can use color to communicate, how we can just build that emotion in how we present ourselves. So I always dress colorful, but my intention isn't the fashion side, it's that emotion side. How do we connect?
mm,
And that's
yeah.
really kind of how I came to really leveraging color. So you see me getting smiling and being really excited about color, and it's because as I talk about it, it kind of brings me back to how I was raised, but also knowing that as people start to have these conversations, you start to see that within everyone's culture, these colors and symbols and all these things that are connected
Mhm,
to us and bring
mhm.
us that sense of feeling they belong or feeling pride in where their heritage or culture is from.
Yes. Yeah, I love that, Nicte. I love the
Thank
example that
you.
you felt like your culture was driving you. And of course, nowadays we all hear that from employees and from organizations. You have to bring your whole self to work, right? So there's no point of hiding your culture. Embrace it. And that's what makes us unique. And that's what, diversifies our different viewpoints and different solutions and becoming that diverse sort of force for good. So I
Mhm.
love that example and how you embraced it and how you embraced the color.
Thank
Now,
you.
knowing what you know and then having gone to design school and having color in your life for so long, I think, from perspective, someone who hasn't studied color, I think we all know, or we all think rather, that we know color. We kind of think what goes with what, and and most
Mhm.
of the time, um, let's say we're starting a new project, a new transformation, or a new sort of initiative at work. And what normally happens is we take the brand logo from the company and we go, okay, we have a template already existing. Here we go. We're going to pop in some words here for the vision, even though we might have workshopped the words and they sound very compelling and it's the right type of message to get across to stakeholders. But we don't necessarily spend enough thought or enough even importance on the fact that color and visual identity may play an even bigger role, especially when it comes to that initial message. I thought I'd throw this out and see what your thoughts are. Like, where do you see that play a role, and is it important? Like, you've done this with clients so many times.
Yeah.
What would be your advice to people who may be just starting to think through some of the change initiatives, or thinking about new change initiatives in the new year? Because, of course, we're just coming to the fourth quarter of the year. So people are kind of starting to think, okay, what have we finished for this year? What is coming up in the next year? So when those wheels are starting to be in motion, what are some of the things that people can start thinking about when it comes to color and when it comes to connecting messages with brands and connecting them with design?
I love that question because it makes me think of sometimes when I do branding work for client, we'll do like strategy where we really think about
Mm,
how their mission and vision are connected, but we look at it through different key points. And if they have a team, how does everyone else feel about that? One of the
Yeah.
biggest challenges sometimes when we're talking about our organization and that inwards vision or the outwards vision and mission is that sometimes we read it so much that we are almost not as aware or in tune to certain keywords or certain ways that this may be presented that it might not align with someone. So one of the
Yeah.
things that I think about, there's two ways to think, to kind of remove yourself so that you can have a better perspective. One of
Mm.
them is, the best example I can think of, we'll just do this live, is how our mission or vision or how this change that we're trying to bring about is presented. So if I show up to, talk with you guys and I'm just showing up like this and, I'm just like, oh, okay, and we're going to bring this change about and, it's really exciting. That whole
Mm.
presentation, like our body language is so crucial to how people receive it. This is
Mm.
the same way with our visuals and how people perceive it. So
Yes.
I'm not going to come and say change is going to be amazing and you're going to have a hard time and that, because that's like way too much. So it's finding that balance. So thinking about
Mm.
how our visuals are delivered when we're trying to instill change or get that buy-in for change is crucial. And how you can go about that is, okay, this, let's say if you already have your mission and vision, I know we're kind of using this as an example because typically that's
Yeah.
kind of where we start from.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you have that, what I recommend is type it up or write it down and put it on a post-it, like, grab a post-it and put it on a random place within the office, but at your house. So at the place where people get their coffee, at the little kitchen, or
Mm.
at the print, wherever you have your printer, places where you're not in your normal environment, like your office, just remove that so that when you walk around to those areas, make have enough space to where you can write notes. This vision, how does this make you feel? And then also think about how does that align with your audience and write
Mm.
quick notes on the post-it of those kind of thoughts. And do that
Yeah.
for maybe a week. And what you'll do is at the end, take a look at those initial thoughts, have your team do that and see what everyone else is coming up with. Because what may happen is you might pull certain keywords that were common that everyone resonated with. And then you can use this as you're using visuals to have emphasis on certain
Mm.
keywords. So that way,
Yeah.
as people scan through our content, because nobody is ever going to fully read everything, but if you can
Yeah.
provide certain keywords that speak to your audience or speak to that change you're trying to instill, that is already being that invitation to bring people in and start to kind of have them want to be a little bit more open to change, right? So it's that invitation. And one of the other things too that I see very often is with type. So I get a lot of people say, I'm not a designer, and I totally get that. But there's certain things that we can do, that anyone can do to
Mm.
make it a better reading experience. So if we're trying to describe a change or we have a document for a big change that we're trying to structure internally or externally within the company, how you use your type and how you structure it is so important. So if you
Mm.
a full paragraph for your headline and all of that text is in all caps, some people say that they feel all caps is kind of yelling. For me, it depends on how you use it. But if
Yeah.
you structure in a way where it's very short text for your headline and that's larger, and then you have a little bit more of a hierarchy. So I always think about this as a high rise. You have the most important stuff in the high rise at the very top, right? And that tends to be your bigger text. Then any
Mm.
supporting text like a subheader can be your VPs and people within the leadership that support that, but you don't
Yeah.
want the text as large. And then you move down to, let's say, middle management, and that's kind of like your body text, a little bit smaller.
Mhm.
So you start to
Yeah.
structure your content in a way that makes it easy for people to read. And by having
Mhm.
all of your text in all caps, what that does is our brains are wired to automatically scan for shapes. So when we're reading and we read text that is in normal I'm blanking out on the term in English, but when the texts aren't all caps, it's just regular sentence form, you'll be able to scan for like the letter P and the B, all these little areas. And I'm not going to get technical just because I want everyone to follow, but our brains will scan quickly for those shapes up and down, and we're able to read fast because of that. But when we have content that is
Um,
all
wow.
caps, we're reading like in
Right.
a rectangular shape. So it
Yeah.
slows down.
Slows
So
down the.
yeah. And let's say you're in a meeting and you have 15 minutes to get to the buy-in for
Mm,
the leadership. All those little things matter in how we present. So sometimes less is more in thinking about the content that
mm,
we present, as
yeah.
well as the colors that we use. So if I was to show a presentation to instill change and I'm using very vibrant colors, which is part of the brand and like the culture and the identity that I use. But if I'm using this for a company that has, they're maybe more about mental health and they're trying to bring that peace of mind and
Mm,
relaxation, and they're trying to make sure that their internal team is in a good mental health state while they're also putting out products or services for their audience, how the colors that we use are going to be very
yeah.
important. So
Yeah.
typically, when it comes to color psychology, it's difficult for me to pinpoint these are the best colors to use.
Mm,
It depends on the audience, who you're trying to market to, the
yeah.
cultures to. So there's all these dynamics, but generally speaking, there's some colors that the more vibrant the colors are, they tend to feel very energetic, very bold.
Mm,
And then colors
yeah.
that aren't as vibrant, like let's say soft blues, like baby blues, baby pinks, those tend to be perceived as naive, a little too soft, but it depends on what you're trying to show or what you're trying to get people to buy in as part of the change, that you can use those colors strategically to
Yeah.
bring in people and make them feel more comfortable talking about these difficult conversations.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, and I think you're right. It is a difficult conversation initially,
Mhm.
and if there is an existing identity, which most companies do already, we work within the corporate branding and the corporate sort of guidelines that people have about visual identity. Um, Perhaps that's a good way to start. And within your context, kind of bringing from what you said, it's very much dependent on the context. Is this like a financial institution company who is very, kind of more, I don't want to say risk adverse, but it's not so much leaping into change. It's not about vibrancy. It's more about let's make sure we're compliant. Let's make sure we're getting to the end of this in a way that will satisfy our shareholders and everyone else. Then that conversation is different versus to a company who is very much customer focused. Their customers are, sort of 20 to 30-year-olds. They're about
Mhm.
vibrancy, they're about color, they're about energy. So, depending on the context, depending on the change that we're trying to talk about, then the color combinations can vary. But also, I think we can have a little bit of play within the defined guidelines, right? I
Yeah.
think
Yes,
that's
I love
that's
that.
where I like to play,
Yes.
even though it may be an already established brand and it could be very formal and everything. And we know, like for example, LinkedIn Learning have got an established logo and it's the deep blue, and the font needs to be very certain and so on. But we as instructors can work with that and give it sort of another flavor. Like I love the yellow, for example, the yellow and deep blue. And the yellow is, to me, yellow is all about learning, all about enlightenment. So I love using that on my posters, but also combining it with the deep blue. So in similar ways, I suppose people can use that and bring forward a little bit more of that flavor of what the change is all about, right?
Love that. And I love how you shared there's opportunities to embrace the brand, like the perfect example for
Mm,
LinkedIn Learning, and how you combine those colors and you still build that meaning towards it. And I think the
mm,
more conscious we are of how we use colors that way, the more effective it'll become over time. And
Yeah.
when we think about, even as you were talking about the financial institution example, which is a perfect example where they might be a little bit more cautious when we're trying to put a big change forward. And
Mm.
what you can do is that if you had set brand colors, define a meaning with that particular color. So if you're trying to
Mm.
instill change that is going to result in
Right.
a increase in revenue for that company, then look at what brand colors you're using that would best connect to that association for revenue. So if it's a green, and it might be a little bit more of a vibrant, energetic green, but that also ties
Yeah.
in, hey, more income, the excitement of this change can bring towards that. Versus if you use a
Mm.
really dark green, you may not get that same embrace for that change. So thinking how you can use color strategically as you present for this change that you're trying to initiate is really powerful, and not enough people are using this.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I love that you can play within the set boundaries, and
Mhm.
I think encouraging people to look a little bit deeper and to think about how they can connect, like the green for increasing revenue, for example, and having those color combinations there. Um, you've seen this done over and over again. So I quite like asking this question from experts. What are sort of some of the biggest mistakes you've seen and you've kind of gone, no? What are some of the anecdotes you can share with us, and so that people learn from that and kind of go, okay, so that's not a good idea to do, or
Yeah.
similar.
So I love that question, because I think that one comes very to mind is sometimes people get so caught up with trending colors, and trends inform
Mm,
us. Trends inform where the market is going, where society is going. So certain things might be happening that influence a certain meaning towards a color,
yeah.
but we shouldn't define the brand identity or whatever colors we use for an initiative based on a trend. It's more of, how are these colors? Why are people using these colors? And is this something that's going
Mm,
to stick? So sometimes what happens, and it's, I would say about 90% of the time that I know, when people are coming up with a brand identity and they're doing strategy work, color is not at all in the conversation. It only
mm,
happens towards the very end. A lot of designers will start with just a black and white logo or brand mark design. And I get it, it's functional, it's just to see the shape in itself. But the conversation about how the color is used won't happen until the very end. So what that happens is we're missing this big, huge gap of opportunity in how we use that color strategically. How does it connect
mm,
with the culture of the company, the culture of the people, like their heritage? So really bringing in that conversation about how do we use color strategically in the strategy of the business, even how that's used for marketing, like all of those initiatives should be done in the beginning. And then the other side of that is tying as well to trends is, you see a lot of the corporate brands use a blue, some version of blue. And it's because
yeah.
it represents loyalty, trust, and of course,
Yeah.
brands who really want to be in that loyal and trust space, which is everyone, are using those colors. But when you're trying to compete, especially if you're a younger company that doesn't have the billion
Mm,
gajillions of resources to put out excellent marketing and branding, you're going to be competing for attention with all of these companies. So, looking for opportunities and how you can use color strategically outside of what the industry is using, and thinking outside of the box to leverage that. Because as you start to put out your content, your marketing, and you're sharing about your mission and vision and kind of being out there,
mm,
people will start to remember you. And if you're one of those brands that uses color strategically to be different than what everyone else is using, little by little, people are going to remember you that way.
yeah. Yeah. And I suppose the color also links very closely to your customers and to your into
Mhm.
your organizational culture. I think you mentioned it a few times. So perhaps a good idea is that before we start branding or we start thinking about colors is to really understand who we're talking to, right? What resonates with that audience, what cultural background are they from, um, if it's something that we're doing within the company, if it's a big transformation or a small transformation, if it's an IT upgrade or whatever it is, like what is the audience and how do they think about that? What sort of colors and visual elements might benefit them to land the message more clearly and more impactfully, right?
Yes, I love how you put that. And I think something that you do so well in your courses was how you help us think about pausing and reflecting, because I think sometimes we get so caught up, especially with the design
Mm,
part. If you have someone in the team that can help you, whether you hire out, but the times when you are trying to do it yourself, because it's uncomfortable, sometimes we rush through that part. And that process of
yeah,
creation is tough, but we don't
yeah.
sit to think about these important elements. Like you say,
Mm,
pause, think about this, write this down, do this analysis of how you want your business to be shown and how your customer is going to connect with that, and then
mm,
use that. Because if you hire someone to build your branding or your brand identity, use those components and share that with the designer, because the right person will ask you for those, but you're already doing
mm,
that work ahead of time. And so you're
yeah.
able to provide that.
I think one of the pitfalls, so one of the scary moments now is we have so much at our fingertips. There's
Mhm.
Canva, there's PowerPoint templates, there's all sorts of different design. There's AI.
Yeah.
All the different tools that we have available to us. So
Mhm.
WordPress, we all can kind of turn into mini designers.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it forces you into a bit of it, we're not designed. So most of the time, I think you're right. We need to pause. And I love the example that you came up in the beginning. Put something up for a week and see how it resonates. Collect the feedback, and then iterate that. Does the color represent what we need to represent? Does the wording represent it? How can we iterate and make it better? And also, in involving that, the collective thinking, the people who would be impacted in the change, they feel like they're co-creating. They feel like they're the designers. And how
Yeah.
much more empowering is that versus coming from outside someone, it may be, someone with great expertise designing something that doesn't necessarily reflect, or getting a quick template of Canva or of the internet, or even an existing template that was used for another change initiative. I'm going, oh, okay, yeah, we've got this. Let's just quickly write up a mission, or this is what we're trying to do in a very technical language. And
Yeah.
often what happens is that message doesn't really land, right?
Yeah. And I love how you said that, reiterating bringing people on board, because
Mm,
people are going to feel so much more connected to something that they felt they were a part of than
yeah,
something that was just like, hey, here, just take this and run with it. Like, okay, what do I do
yeah.
with this? So there's that level of excitement that I see when people are leveraging
Mm,
uh,
yeah,
this initiative and kind of being a part of it. And I think that
yeah.
that's crucial for any organization to do. And you know what? I think the biggest moments I've seen challenges in change is when we're doing a rebrand, because that's almost, depending on how
Mm,
intense it is, that's very difficult for people to go through that process of rebranding, whether it's how do you communicate, the words that you use, how that's emphasized, your visuals, your colors,
mm,
all of those things. So people who have had their companies for years and years, like I've had this as part of my process with some clients, I have to be very aware that it's sometimes like little stepping stone steps to get them
yes.
through that change. And if they
Yeah.
are involved in it, and they feel like they're a part of that change, they're going to be 100% more into it, rather than if I say, oh, okay, I hear what you said, here's what you like. No, that's not, you said that perfectly. It makes it so much better for the company internally and externally when the group of people, not if you have like 1,000 people in your company, you don't want the 1,000 people giving feedback, but having the right people within leadership provide that. And, it's like that symbiotic relationship in a way when you're rebuilding a brand. I wanted to ask you a question because I think that it's so important.
Yes. Woo,
We're talking
the
about
tables have turned.
I know. And I think because I love your perspective on how we need to pause and go through change. And I think sometimes when people are going through things in life, they're kind of like, let's just get on with it. Let's just move forward, kind of flight or fight mode. And what I see from my perspective within designers and brand strategists is when we are talking about major change, or we're trying to present something to the client, and how we present it is so important. But sometimes, especially I know when I was starting off, I didn't present things quite as great. And it was more like, hey, here's the design, here's kind of like the focus, but it was very design oriented and not more, how does this help you? How does this help the organization? So when we are trying to present something, whether you're a contractor or the company hired you for that specific, so you're thinking outside, presenting in, what would be something that you would say is a must in terms of presenting to get that buy-in, or at least more of that openness?
My starting point has always been, what is the problem that we're trying to solve? What is that burning platform? How does the wording, the organizational wording, reflect that? And then try to incorporate as much of that into the solution that we're trying to get an approval for. So whether you're presenting to the CEO or you're presenting to this smaller group that would be responsible for that particular, whether it's marketing or whether it's internal communications, or whatever team that sort of will be responsible for carrying that message through, it's almost, try to reflect what is the issue, why is that an issue, really understand why is that an issue for the company, and then use the corporate language that the company speaks with, not your own, not, as a consultant, you need to be very flexible and very adaptive to that corporate culture and corporate message. So try to reflect as much of that as you can into the solution that you're presenting. And of course, that may not be perfect because you may not have all of these answers initially. So my advice would be, if you don't have the answers initially, if you don't know exactly how to reflect the message, maybe have a few one-on-ones before that big presentation. Go out for a coffee with a few of the different stakeholders, understand how they're talking about it. Is it a change that is going to be welcome, or people are fearing for the change? Are they excited? Is the company normally looking forward to change? Is there like a culture of being innovative and open to new things? Or are people scared about their jobs? Like, what is the general feel? And after you get all of these insights, then your presentation will be a lot more impactful. It will be a lot more on point with what the solution that they're looking for.
I love that. I love that you share that. And I think that it's almost like you become part of the company for that time that you're with them, that you're really fully immersed. And, that was something that I later learned by intuition, and obviously a lot of failures in that presentation. But that's something that I wanted to ask you, because I think within, my part of the industry, that's not something that we are necessarily trained for in design school. I don't know if it's changed nowadays, and I hope so. But I think a lot of what you work with and you focus on, it's so crucial for like the business side of understanding a problem and a solution. Because what happens too is that, let's say, this is like the flip side of, sometimes designers focus so much on the pretty stuff, and I don't like to use that term, But
Yeah.
sometimes it's just like the flashy designs and all these pretty things, but when
Yeah.
you read the content, there's no focus on what is the power behind the mission and the why, and how is the why behind the company going to impact their stakeholders, but also the people they're trying to sell their products or
Mm.
services. And so it's almost like this just facade. And so
Mm.
why I asked that question was because if a company is wanting to hire a designer and it's all about the flashiness, but there's no time to, and we're having a little bit of tech issues. It's okay. I'm going to keep talking. But when we are having that conversation of how does that company work internally? How does the company communicate and
Mm.
investing that time and not just running to make those quick designs? Having companies understand that it's important to find the person that meets that vision and meets you in the middle is so important. So that's, I'm so glad you mentioned that, reiterated that, because I think that's important for designers, brand strategists, everyone to really embrace the thought process that you're so great at sharing and slowing down so that we're not trying to rush into creating the design, but really listening and kind of going through those.
Yeah, and you know, I think in a funny way, the lines are kind of blurring now. You know, we all have roles in corporate, that we need to deliver a message, and that message needs to make a point. So in a funny way, we're all kind of designers and brand strategists, even though
Mhm.
we don't necessarily have that background. We're all trying to, you know, use as much visuals, as much of that to correlate to the message that we're trying. And I really think of change managers and change leaders as marketeers, because we're
Mm.
marketing that to the end audience, to the end users, to the people who will be impacted by the change. And it would be so beneficial, I think, if change management had like a module on marketing and everyone learned what proper marketing and vice versa. You know, if like brand strategists and marketing and people who like yourself,
Yeah.
designers, can learn about the business side of things and how to make that message more powerful. So I
Oh my gosh,
love that
yeah.
we're exchanging this on the forum here and giving
Yeah.
people an opportunity to, you know, kind of go, oh, okay, so it does make sense to know about color. It does make sense to know about language. All of these things make sense to know.
Yeah, absolutely, because 'cause they're all connected, and I
Mhm.
love how you said that too, because I think it's opportunities for people internally to collaborate. So if you have people in your department that are in marketing, and then you have someone that's trying to instill change, like, if you can bring people together to speak each other's languages,
Yeah.
then you can move together to implement that change, and I think that the word, like you were saying, we're all being thrown things that we have to learn to do, that it's not, we're like not just siloed to like this is all I do and that's it.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
having to do things that are outside of what our normal part is, but it's crucial to do that in order to work in a more coexisting way with other people within
Mhm.
departments
Yes.
or externally. So I love how you circled that together.
Oh, fantastic. Now, if we wanted to use more visual elements, what would be your advice there?
I love that. So one of the very easiest way to do this is through some sort of photography. There's a
Yeah.
lot of great resources online where you can get free stock images,
Yeah.
but what I recommend is looking at body language and looking at and you know, if you wanted to, Christina, we could share some examples of
Yeah. Love them.
some stock images that I have. So let's do my share screen. And okay, so this is for a client, and right now I have Adobe Stock. So I found all these stock images on Adobe Stock, and what for this client, their name is Two Peers Consulting, and they're about creating diverse and equitable environments for individuals or companies. And so as she was sharing content, it was very important to be inclusive, but
Yeah.
also find images or stock images that use her brand colors. So as you search for these, see if you can find a lot of stock as like Foundries, even Adobe stock. These are all free. You can tailor it to where I want to find images that include these colors. So you can use your brand
Oh, wow.
colors
Okay.
find that. Yeah, so it's really great. So as you're doing a search, you can tailor it to search for that particular keyword, but then also within a certain color. So
Oh,
that
that's
way you can,
fantastic.
yes. So it's a great way if you don't have the budget to hire a professional photographer, this is a great way to do it. So look at inclusive examples where you are being inclusive. And by inclusive, I'm also talking about our culture, race, but also
Mm.
accessibility. When it comes to people in the work environment, you don't see a lot of people within the wheelchair, and what you see sometimes is a bit biased. So
Yeah.
looking at, do they look like they're just having a normal work environment? We're here, they're kind of having a conversation about business, and it feels less posed.
Yeah.
So those typical real estate pictures that you always see with people crossing their hands, or trying to avoid those if you're trying to really
Yes.
bring people
Yeah.
into the environment. So these were all sorts of images that I looked for that try to tell a different story for the content that she would share, but also felt like made people feel like they're kind of like a fly in the wall and observing in this
Mm.
type of content. And as you're sharing this type of content, thinking about, if you're going to show this internally, making sure it represents your internal culture. But if you're going to use this externally, making sure that it represents your diverse audience. So
Yeah.
keeping that in mind. The great thing about social media and online platforms is that we don't have to worry so much about printing things. We can create all these types of content digitally and change the images. So,
Yeah.
this is
Fantastic.
just an example of how we can look at people of different ages, genders, and
Mm-hmm.
how they are in the work environment, and looking at body language.
Yeah.
That is the most crucial part that people often miss when using stock
Mm.
is the body language, and that
That's so
tells you
important.
so much.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Wow. I love this. Thank you for sharing that, Nicte. And it's important. I think a lot of the times within change management, in my experience, you have a few projects on the go. There's not huge budgets, so not everyone can afford a professional branding
yeah.
expert
Mhm.
and professional marketing material. So yeah, a lot of the times we go, oh yeah, there's all these different templates, but the fact that you can specify what elements you're looking for and what sort of colors and visual elements resonate, I think that's fantastic. I
Yeah.
wanted to also ask you, I know we're coming kind of close to our top time, but I wanted to quickly ask you, when we are encountering a new transformation, new project, new change within the organization, people often feel resistance toward that change, and it's part of human nature. What are some quick ways that you've seen visual color, brand, and cultural elements can work with that resistance and can turn it the other way around?
That's a great question. I think a lot of it is, how can you use visuals to communicate something that words can't? So
Mm,
in I am not that great with words. This is like, I've had to learn to really think, because English is not my first language. So sometimes I am still in that, okay, I have to like reprocess things. But thinking
mm,
about, how can we sometimes simplify words to get a
mm.
meaning, but how can we use a visual and even our body language? I was telling you kind of like the earlier example of, if I was just like monotone and just like I'm just like slouched, it
Yes.
completely changes how people perceive the content. So thinking about, if this was this person that you're trying to present, how would they want to perceive this? How would it make them more open to it? And also
Mm,
leading with, if you need to include data, and let's say we're keeping with the example of the financial institution, sometimes you have to lead with data to bring people in and using that in a way that's easy for them to understand. And
Mm-hmm.
then you can kind of tell in the story. The other thing is how you use colors, especially in areas where people might be change adverse, could work against you. So let's say we're
Yeah.
using really vibrant colors to where your background is, let's say, kind of like this, the color of my jacket, it's like a vibrant orange. And then you have black text. And then next to that, you have some red lines or some red dots and yellows. Those are very, very bright colors. And if you're
Mm.
trying to bring people to read something or to present, it could be a little bit of a shock factor. So
Mm. So
finding ways.
it could play against you rather than for you. Yeah.
Yes, especially if it's going to be a tough topic on change,
Mm.
finding ways to not have such stark, like the colors are competing for attention. You want the
Yeah.
colors to help you communicate. So thinking
Mm.
about what colors do I want for the headline to just grab the attention? And then if we're going to focus on financials, we need to use this color so that you're almost kind of color coding how you're informing without necessarily
Mm.
telling your audience. So being aware of that. And one quick test to know if you don't have enough contrast is if you squint your eyes and all the text and the background starts to kind of get the same gray, blurry color. That means you don't have enough contrast. Of course, you want to use like the tools we can use online to kind of make sure you have enough contrast for accessibility purposes, but also if it's hard for people to read, they're not going to be engaged. That's
Mm.
the initial point. So having those little baseline guidelines implemented or really help how you perceive that. And we can even do that same example, like I said earlier, print it out. I'm not a fan of telling people to print. I try to be environmentally friendly, but
Yes.
it's helpful sometimes to not think of it in the moment. Put it in a random place in your kitchen, in the office kitchen, wherever, and see what your thoughts are on this. You'll be able to have a different perspective that's not by pressure when you're in your office to make those decisions or
Mm.
those analysis of how is this going to be perceived.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And I love the little little test of squinting your
Yeah.
eyes because of course, that's within our means and it's an immediate feedback that we can do ourselves. So I love that.
Thank
Um
you.
This been so valuable talking to you about this and I think sharing with people what they can do and some of the tips and tricks. If people wanted to find out more, what is the best place that they find you and connect with you?
Yeah, I love that. First of all, thank you so much for having Christina. This has been so much fun. I think I will probably talk to you for another couple hours. I just love your energy. So thank you so much.
Thank
Um,
you.
I so appreciate you. To find me, I live a lot more on LinkedIn. I am a little biased. I just love LinkedIn. There's a great community there. So you can find me at Nicte Cuevas on LinkedIn. I also have several courses on LinkedIn Learning. I have several courses on color on LinkedIn Learning, but I also have courses on Adobe Express, which is similar to Canva, but I kind of show you how business owners can leverage this tool to
Mm.
design their own content. And I show examples of like, here's how you can use this color to help enhance your content. So I really want to empower businesses, big and small, to use tools to their advantage, especially with color. So you guys can find me as well on LinkedIn Learning.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Nicte. It's been invaluable having this conversation. And if anyone's watching this as a recorded session and it has any questions for either Nicte or myself, please feel free to drop us a comment and we'll come back. Please connect with us and stay curious so we can make change happen.
I
Goodbye,
love that.
everyone.
Yes.
Thank you so
Bye.
much.
Thank you.